Hey guys, today I'm here with the Teraflex Delta Big Brake Kit fitting the 5x5 bolt pattern on all 2007 to 2019 JK and JL Wranglers. So when you add a lot of weight to your Wrangler, whether that be wheels and tires, a ton of cargo, or even a lot of armor around your Wrangler, stopping power becomes very important. This option by Teraflex is going to be a great solution to that at a relatively affordable price for a big brake kit. This is going to come with large slotted rotors and large 4-piston calipers and accommodating brake pads to increase your stopping power and give you a little bit of extra bite when you have to stop all of that extra weight on your Jeep. This is also going to be perfect for the Jeep owner who needs to do a little bit of maintenance but wants an upgrade in the meantime with a high quality kit. This kit is also designed specifically for lifted Wranglers and is going to be made of heavy duty materials and a heavy duty construction to make sure that this is able to take that abuse on the trail, and I'll get further into that construction a little bit later in the video. What I really like about this kit and what makes it stand out from the rest on the site is the fact that this is very easy to maintenance and parts for this are very easily accessible when it comes to replacing them. The pads mounted up inside of the calipers here are actually off-the-shelf Toyota pads, so first of all, they're affordable again, and they also are very easily accessible. Not to mention, you won't have to remove the caliper in order to install replacement pads, and the valve that's installed is a one-way check system, so you can bleed all of your brakes yourself. I would like to mention though, you will need a minimum of a 17-inch wheel as well as 4.75 inches of back spacing in order to install this kit on your Wrangler. Teraflex does provide a fitment template on their website, so if you want to upgrade to this brake system, you can always check if your setup is going to fit with this brake kit. Now, with all of that being said, this is actually going to be relatively affordable for a big brake kit, like I mentioned before, at roughly $2,200. Now, that does seem like a steep price in comparison to all of those replacement parts that are pretty standard and not for an upgraded system. So essentially, replacement calipers, rotors, and pads that are not a big brake kit is going to be roughly half the price, but it's not going to give you as much stopping power as this. Now, when we take a look at some more expensive options on the page, those are usually going to have some bells and whistles. They may include 2-piece rotors as well as drilled in slotted rotors for better venting, or they're just going to be made by premium brands like Brembo or Bear that specifically manufacture brakes. So in my personal opinion, I think that first of all, Teraflex is a very reputable brand. They make high quality parts, and even though they don't specialize in brakes, this is a very high quality system that has a lot of great features, and if you're not looking to break the bank, this is going to be a great setup to choose. Now, install is going to be a 2 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter. This is going to take you roughly 2 hours to get done in your driveway with some basic hand tools and a couple of specialty tools. So speaking of that install, let's jump into that now. The tools that I used for my install were a torque wrench, a cutoff wheel, a pick, an angle grinder, an electric and pneumatic impact wrench, a pair of safety glasses, a small pry bar, a can of paint, brake lubricant, a socket set ranging from 21 millimeters down to 10 millimeters, a T30 torque socket, a pair of needle nose pliers, brake hose clamp, a caliper hanging tool, a marker, a 10 millimeter open-ended wrench, a ratcheting wrench set ranging from 18 millimeters down to 15 millimeters, a ball peen hammer, and a bottle of brake fluid. Before we hop into this install, I would like to mention for you JK and you JKU owners, you will need to upgrade your brake booster for this install. Now, Teraflex does recommend that you use the J8 brake booster from Mopar, and if you have a manual or standard transmission, you will need a clutch reservoir as well, and Teraflex also recommends the GM clutch reservoir for this. Now, with that being covered, our first step is to get our Jeep up in the air. We will be starting with the front, so if you are in a jack and jack stands, you want to jack up the front and chock those rear wheels, and then we can take off our caliper. Next, we can take off our caliper, removing the 2 bolts that are holding this to the knuckle. I'm going to be using a 21 millimeter deep socket for a little bit of extra clearance and my impact wrench. Once those are removed, we can take off the caliper from the rotor and hang it from either a bungee cord, or I have a caliper hanger tool. We want to make sure that we are not hanging it by the brake line. Next, we're going to go ahead and take off the rotor. On the JL, you will have a bolt here that's holding on the rotor. We are going to be using a T30 Torx to remove that, but if you have a JK and you're doing this install on a JK, you will need to remove the rotor clips and then discard them. Then we can go ahead and pull off the rotor. So our next step is to take off our backing plate. There are 3 10mm bolts that are holding it on. For the JL, we just need to bend it back a little so it's not interfering with our rotor. For the JK, if you have heavy-duty steering, you will need to cut off and trim the tab that comes off of the backing plate. That will interfere with your steering as well as the rotor if you do keep that on. So for the JL, we're going to go ahead and take this off and bend this little part at the front back. So where the backing plate bumps out, we're just going to bend it back a little bit. Now it should not interfere with our rotor. So now we can reinstall this on our knuckle. Tighten those back up with the 10mm socket. Before we continue with the install, I wanted to stop down and tell you guys a little bit about the differences between this new Teraflex Delta kit and what benefits that you're going to see out of this new kit in comparison to our factory setup. Now, there are 3 major components going on with our braking system. We have our caliper, our rotor, and our brake pads. Now, starting off with the caliper, there are a lot of details jam-packed into this design. In comparison to our factory setup, you will have 2 pistons in the front and 1 piston in the rear caliper, and that is going to make a total of 6 pistons on all 4 corners. Now, moving over to the Teraflex Delta kit, this is going to have 4 pistons in each caliper, so we are upgrading from 6 total pistons to 16. And that's going to be very impressive considering the stopping power that we can expect out of these large calipers. Now, with your factory braking system, the piston is going to have to travel a decent amount to push the pad up against the rotor. With this new Teraflex system, this is going to cut that travel length in half, which is going to minimize the amount of fluid that it takes to push that pad up against the rotor, keeping a stiff brake pedal. Like I mentioned before, this Teraflex kit is also going to have a very heavy-duty construction and be able to take some abuse, especially off-road and in high braking situations. This is going to have a high-modulus bridge here that's going to be made of steel, and essentially what that means is that it's not going to allow any bending, braking, flexing in high braking situations or hard braking situations, should I say. Other options on the page or other options in general are usually made of a cast iron material or an aluminum material that won't hold up as well as this steel option. So this is something that I definitely think that is impressive out of this Teraflex braking kit. So the other thing that I really like about this system, and I think that's pretty impressive off of Teraflex's part, is the fact that this has a 1 check valve system as far as bleeding goes. So essentially what that means is that when you open the valve, it will let that fluid out, but it's going to have a ball and a spring that will not allow any air back into the caliper, making it very easy to bleed your brakes, and you could essentially bleed them yourself. So moving on to the rotor, your factory rotors, depending on if you are installing this on a JK or if you have a JL, they are either going to be 12 or 13 inches. When you are moving over to this Teraflex system, this rotor is going to be a whopping 14 inches, so you're either increasing 1 or 2 inches in diameter, which is going to be making an incredible difference even though it is only an inch or 2. That's going to add to that stopping power, and it's also going to be slotted, which is going to add a little bit of extra bite and a little bit of extra ventilation. Now, speaking of ventilation, all 4 of these rotors are going to be ventilated. On your factory system, the front ones will be ventilated, but the rears will not. So this is gonna help out with heat dispersion, and that is going to be very important when it comes to braking because of all of that extra friction that's being caused by all of that extra stopping power. Now moving over to the brake pads, this is going to be a big upgrade in itself. Your factory brake pads are about half the size of this new Teraflex option, and your factory ones are going to be made of a ceramic material. Now that's perfect for stock applications and even a little bit of performance applications. They usually are very quiet as well as emit very low brake dust, but for high braking or hard braking situations, you would want something a little bit more, and that's exactly what Teraflex is bringing to the table with a semi-metallic pad. So these are able to handle high temperatures under hard braking, which is perfect when stopping all of that extra rotational mass and all of that extra weight that's on your Wrangler, especially for a big brake kit like this. Now the biggest perk out of these brake pads is the fact that these are actually off-the-shelf Toyota pads, making them very easily accessible and relatively affordable for a high-performance big braking kit. Not to mention, you don't even have to take off the caliper in order to install these or replace these on your Wrangler, making this very easy to maintenance. Now with all of that being said, those are going to wrap up the main differences of this kit, so let's hop back into the install. So before we take off our factory caliper, what I want to do is set up our front and our rear caliper. On the back here, we are going to have a badge that states which one is the front and which one is the rear. You can also tell by the mounting locations. So what we're going to do is start with the front. We're going to go ahead and set up the pads as well as the retainer clips. So first we need to lubricate the brake pads. You're just going to want to use brake lubricant for this. You can grease up the back as well as the sides. We also want to lubricate our pins. Making sure that our caliper is oriented in the correct way, we want to take the brake pad with the wear indicator, making sure that it is at the front on the outside so it's easily visible for maintenance, and we can drop this down into place. Now we can hold it there with both of our pins. What we can do now is install our second brake pad, hold that into place, and install our pad spreader before we go ahead and push the pin through to the other side. I'm going to make sure that the bend is sitting on top of the pad. This loop is going around the pin, push the pin through, and then fully to the other side. So if the pin is giving you a little bit of trouble going through the other side, what you can do is just lightly tap it. So now we can install our locking retainer for our pins. So what I'm going to do is turn the pins both in facing the middle so we can attach that bracket. Just using a pick to help orient them in the correct position. Once that's through, we can put this in the middle. Then our caliper is set up as far as the brake pads go. Then we can install our bleeder up on the top here. So first we need to take this protective cover off, and then we can install our bleed valve assembly. So what we're gonna do is put this ball inside, take our spring, put that inside our bleeder and then thread this into place. Now we're only going to keep this finger tight for now, and we can tighten it down a little bit later. So after our bleeder valve assembly is installed and finger tight, while we're on the table, we're going to go ahead and put together our rear caliper, and then we can head back over to the Jeep. So before you install the rotor, I would hit it with a decent amount of brake cleaner, but now we can mount this up to our hub here. And to make our life a little bit easier, what we're gonna do is just thread on a lug nut to make sure that it is held in place while we mount up our caliper. What we can do now is mount our caliper up into place, lining up the back of the mounting locations and threading a bolt through. Now I would recommend to put thread locker on each of these bolts. So to keep the rotor in place, I just threaded one bolt in, but you want to make sure that you hit this with a little bit of blue Loctite, and you are provided with that in the kit. Once both are threaded on, what we can do is tighten these up, and then we can attach our brake line. I'm going to tighten these up with a 21mm socket. Next step is to clamp our brake line to minimize the amount of fluid that's going to come out of that line, and then we can disconnect it from our caliper. I'm going to use a brake line clamping tool. Clamp that down. So I'm going to take a 15mm socket, and we can remove this banjo bolt here. And you want to make sure that there is a pan underneath because brake fluid will come out. With the new washers in the kit in hand, what we're going to do is install this brake line with the factory banjo bolt. Once that's threaded into place, we can tighten that up with that same 15mm socket. And then we can torque this to 25 foot-pounds. So our last big steps for up front is just to take off our brake line clamp. And then for the actual brake line itself, on the JL, the models may differ between the style of brake lines. This part of the brake line needs to sit parallel with our caliper here. So all we have to do is just bend it up. Now, if you don't want to bend your brake line, you can go ahead and replace these, but now that we're finished up with the front, we can head to the rear. So now that we're in the rear, the process is going to be pretty similar to the front. Our first step is going to be to modify the brake line slightly on the JL model. Now again, if you are on a jack and jack stands, you want to make sure that you jack up the rear, chock the front wheels, and remove those rear tires. Then we can go ahead and modify that brake line. So essentially what we need to do is give ourselves a little bit more length out of this bracket here when it comes to the actual brake line. So we're gonna move this ABS line out of the way. We're just gonna pop this out of the bracket that's attached to our soft line there. Just a little grommet that you have to twist out. Let's put that to the side. And then we can wiggle the brake line backwards. What we can do now is remove our caliper from the rotor. There are 2 bolts holding it on just like the front. However, these are going to be 18 millimeters and they are going to be a little bit hard to reach. So I'm going to use an 18 millimeter ratcheting wrench to remove those. Same for the bottom. Put these bolts to the side, and again, we want to make sure that we're not hanging this by the brake line. Pull this away and hang it out of the way. Right, now we can remove our rotor. Next, we can remove our rotor by removing that bolt. I'm going to be using the T30 Torx bit that we used up front as well as my impact wrench. Get this out and wiggle off our rotor. So our next step is to mock up the caliper because we will have to trim our backing plate on the JL model. So we're gonna mount this up in the factory location. I'll show you guys in just a minute when we mount this up again with the rotor on our hub here. But for right now, I need to mock this up to make sure that this is not overlapping with our caliper. So as you can tell with the caliper mounted up, that these parts of the backing plate are overlapping the caliper. What we're gonna do is make a mark, take the caliper off, and trim the backing plate. So I'm just gonna go along side of the caliper, make a mark. Same for up top. And then we can take this off, grab a cutoff wheel, and trim the back plate. So with a pair of safety glasses as well as your cutoff wheel, what we're going to do is go ahead and trim the back plate. So what I'm doing now is just cleaning up the edges. I'm going to hit it with a little bit of paint and then we can attach our rotor. Now we can install our rotor and do the same thing by threading on a lug nut to hold it in place. Again, before you install it, I would recommend to hit it with a decent amount of brake clean, and we will have to wiggle it over the hub here. Make sure that is seated correctly. So because we don't have a lot of room to work with in the back, we can't mount up our caliper first, then swap over the brake line. What we're gonna do is just get this factory caliper out of the way. So same process as the front, we're gonna have to clamp that brake line. Now making sure that there's a pan underneath the caliper, what we can do is take a 15 millimeter socket or a 15 millimeter wrench and remove that banjo bolt. So we can just get this out of the way. So now we can mount up our caliper. We're going to be mounting it in the factory location with the factory bolts. Now again, I would make sure to put blue thread locker on both of these bolts, and then we can tighten those back up with that 18mm ratcheting wrench. So these bolts on the JL will have to be torqued to 148 foot-pounds. On the JK, they'll be torqued to 100 foot-pounds. Next, we can install our brake line. We're using our factory banjo bolt, but adding our supplied washers. After that's on, we can tighten that up with a 15mm ratcheting wrench. And we can remove our brake line clamp. So after that clamp is taken off, we are essentially done with the rear driver side. Now you are going to want to repeat that process on the other side, and then we can start bleeding our brakes. Now I'm going to show you guys on our rear driver side how to bleed the brakes, but in your situation with all four corners done, you will want to start at the farthest point from the master cylinder. So on this JL, the master cylinder is up at the front driver's side, so you would essentially want to start at the rear passenger side, move to the rear driver's side, then up to the front passenger side, and ending up with the front driver's side. Now what we're gonna do now is go ahead and bleed this rear brake so I can show you guys how to do that. So now we can go ahead and bleed the system. Now you are gonna need a 10mm wrench in order to do this. And I would like to mention that this is going to be a one-check spring-loaded system. So essentially what that means, it's not going to allow any air back into the caliper, and it's only going to allow fluid out. So essentially this is a one-man job. It is a little bit easier with a friend, so you can keep an eye on the fluid. Now speaking of keeping an eye on things, I would recommend that you keep an eye on your master and cylinder. Make sure that the brake fluid is not getting too low. So after you're done bleeding the system, then I would recommend to check that master cylinder one more time and you'll be all set to go. So that's gonna wrap it up for my review and install. Make sure you like and subscribe, and for more videos and products like this, always keep it right here at ExtremeTerrain.com.